Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 221 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on October 18th, 2020. This is the official podcast for the fan site AvatarTheLastAirbenderOnline.com. I'm going to be your main host for this podcast, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
So, let's get into this one. We have quite a bit of news to cover actually at the start, and then we're going to be getting into our main topic for this episode, which will be our review for the newly released Avatar comic, Katara and the Pirate Silver, the first one-shot Avatar comic. But like I said, quite a bit of news, and it all came out pretty much in the last few days. So we're going to start off with an update we got on the comics from Rachel Roberts, who's the editor, of course, for the Avatar and Korra stuff, on their weekly stream, because of course they had a new Avatar book out this month. They actually decided to do a bit of an update on things. So we got confirmation on something we didn't really know, but it was nice to get, that the one-shots that we have right now are actually a trilogy of one-shots. And it is a themed trilogy. They're specifically calling it, I think it was the Awesome Ladies of Avatar trilogy. So Katara, Toph, and this confirms to us that there is a third one coming, and it will be with a female character as the focus. So they didn't say who it was, but it got some people speculating. And I suppose this also confirms to us that likely after this trilogy we'll go into another trilogy of one-shots, because I suppose linked to this, they finally gave, I think this was probably the key piece of information from the stream, they finally gave an update on why we have switched over to doing one-shots and why they've moved away from the trilogies after Imbalance. In that, Rachel Roberts said they have now switched their approach with the comics to a more, I think the word she used was sandbox style approach, and this directive came from Mike and Brian. They asked them to do the comics in this way and to step away from doing the, continuing the canon trilogies. So this is what they're doing for the next while, I guess. So that's all really, really interesting. So Greg, what are your thoughts on that, finding out about these one-shot trilogies that are themed? And Mike and Brian are the ones ultimately behind this decision to do things this way.
I think it's definitely an interesting take on it. I guess it is, it's sort of similar to a lot of way that other comics do their stories, where it's not necessarily always has to be part of like one huge sort of continuous storyline, and usually after a while those will get sort of rebooted anyway or retconned. There's many cases of that happening. So taking this approach is, I don't know, I guess it's different from what we're used to as, I guess, Avatar fans and what we've done in the past. So it'll be interesting to see how this approach works long term, I guess. I mean, right now there's really only one book that has this sort of precedence, and we have one that's announced, and we know that there's a bunch more coming. So it'll be interesting to see how, I don't know, if they're all sort of so themed and linked together as this current sort of like series is, and how they actually sort of, I guess, tie them in together. If it's really just sort of like the theme name that keeps them together, or if there's something more, I guess, interconnected between them, even if they are more sort of your one-shot type of books.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting that, like, only now are we finding out that it actually is a trilogy of one-shots. If it was like really clear about that, you'd think when the Korra comic was announced, the Katara comic was announced, they would have said that, or even with the Toph one as the second one. So I almost get the impression it's not really a like really clear theme necessarily, and more just a general one. In that, my guess is that they are just going to be character focused, like one shots. So the next one, I assume, will also be pretty general overall. But the main thing, Mike and Brian making this decision, and obviously this seems very counterproductive, but we have to keep in mind that the Katara comic is out right now, but realistically, the planning for this book and them making that decision happened like 9 months to a year ago, when they were still working on the Netflix show, and probably thought that they were going to be super busy for the next however many years. So there's definitely still room for things to change now that they're not working on that, and potentially can put more time into it, which I've seen that speculation out there about this, that okay, that was them basically saying, while we're doing this, pause the really heavy Avatar story until we can get back to it. So can we get back to that quicker now or not? That's what I'm not sure. How do you interpret that Mike and Brian decision, given the timing of when that decision likely was made?
Yeah, I wonder how much of that actually plays into it, or if it's just sort of like a way that's just easier to do the comics in general, just from having sort of like the single stories, character focus, something that still fits in the world, but isn't necessarily going to push the whole sort of storyline forward, mainly just because of time and availability that they have. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know even if they did, if they do now have the time to do that, would they really want to go back to it, since it seems like this is just a different approach that, potentially could work really well. I mean, I think it's something that definitely has to be sort of evaluated and seen. We'll see how well, the Katara book actually does, and the Toph book, and whatever the third one in the series. I think that'll probably be the main thing that'll, tell Dark Horse and, the team, this is something that we can keep on going with, or do we need to switch back to what we were doing before?
Mm-hmm. They also went over, like, I suppose, the creative process, which we, I suppose, haven't really had much of an update on in a while. They talked about the whole creative team that includes the editors, Joan Hilty from Nickelodeon, Mike and Brian in the case of some books, but in the case of these one-shots, it seems like only Tim Hedrick was the sort of writing staff assistants on these, and they basically got together at the start, and the impression I got was they came up with all three stories at once, pretty much, and worked on them from there, with, of course, Bayther and Hicks writing the outlines and stuff like that, and then working to get it the way they wanted it. So that, I suppose, confirms to us the whole Tim Hedrick inclusion in some of like the recent descriptions for books. But again, the timing on this is at a point when Mike and Brian were still on the Netflix show, so how has things changed from now? I'm not particularly sure. There was a random point where the Rachel Roberts was asked the question about, like, basically the timeline of the Katara comic, and the response here I wasn't particularly happy with, because I feel the book is very easy to place, like, to the episode, to the day, basically, where it takes place in the timeline. And Rachel Roberts gave, like, basically, it's up to the fans' imagination as the answer. And I wasn't particularly happy with that, given that there's been a lot of complaints about the comics not having a ton of detail recently and not feeling particularly important. So a response like that, kind of like dismissing a detail question, feels not great. But what are your thoughts on the creative description that we got here with Tim Hedrick?
I mean, Tim Hendrick, I mean, his involvement seemed like it definitely, I guess, it definitely helped as far as like having someone who's really close to the core story in order to, figure out stories that will work within, the timeline that we have, and, potentially it doesn't like conflict with anything else that we, might happen in the future or anything like that, which I think this book, as we'll get into later on, does a good job of not really upsetting much, as far as like, some loopholes or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting. I did notice the whole comment about where it was placing on the timeline. And, since we've talked about it so much, I was pretty much expecting to have like, I guess at least a little bit more of a location. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it bothered me personally that much, because I think that seems like the default safe sort of like marketing answer. So I guess maybe I'm just like used to that at this point. But yeah, I mean, I was like, I mean, it can only be really so many places, just because of, just noting like her outfit and her attire and stuff like that, which they make note in the book, that's how to key in on Katara, is like, that's like I don't know. It seems like that's like sort of a giveaway to me, even if you're not like a super like, hardcore fan that's trying to place it in an exact moment like we typically try to do. So I don't know. I guess it was a little bit dismissive, but that seemed like the default thing that would be said like at a panel or something like that. So
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think I had a problem with it more because like the book pretty directly says like bitter work happened yesterday, and it's not said after the library because it can't be said after the library because there's no gap in the story for the rest of book two. But we move on. After that, they basically went through the lineup, sort of similar to what we actually did last time on the podcast. But
Mm.
of course, they had a lot of the books to actually show. Rachel Roberts did in person, so we got a look in hand at the Search Omnibus edition and uh, the spine image that's going to be built up. Of course, it's just the North and South Library edition cover, but it was nice to see that book in hand because it's out in a few weeks. I think that's the next book out. Uh, we got to see the short story collection library edition in hand as well. They went over the new cover and confirmed that the extra pages that we knew about are actually going to be concept art bonus stuff. I don't think we know what it is, but my guess is that it's probably going to be mainly from Team Avatar Tales, because I don't know how much there would be from the Lost Adventures stuff, but we'll have to wait and see. So that was quite interesting. But I suppose the most interesting thing was we got a look in hand at the second edition Avatar art book, as well as the deluxe art book. Now they didn't show off all of it in particular detail, but we got what the whole connection is between all of the deluxe edition art books. That when you get all five of them and put the spines of the slipcases back to side by side, it creates this interesting Rava and Vatu pattern. Now, again, I think she got some sort of marketing material poster out to show it, so we didn't get the best look at it. But it seems to be a sort of like navy and white, more graphical style image with like Rava on the top pointing up and Vatu pointing down. But it looks pretty cool put together. But yeah, that was most of the stuff they went over on the stream. Do you have any thoughts on going through the books here that they showed off?
I don't know. It was cool to see what they actually sort of look like, and I think it was a lot of emphasis on that they will, look cool on your shelf from the spine perspective, just to see, how they all look together. So they really are sort of pushing this sort of the collector idea with these, which is kind of cool, especially if you don't have them already.
hmm Last thing from the stream was just one point sort of in the middle of everything. They did mention that there's basically a bunch of unannounced stuff that they're not quite ready to talk about yet. They didn't really specify if it was for Avatar or it was for Korra. This felt like her reiterating what she said in her interview from like back in March, which was that there was lots of different formats and styles of books coming out. And like we discussed last week, the fact that there's very little Korra stuff going on very much gives me the impression that like, okay, you've got a Korra book to announce, which we'll talk about in just a second, but there might be something else as well, and I'm not really sure what that actually is. But yeah, what were your thoughts on that? The little tease of a lot more to be announced.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's just how they're doing things now. Just there's something coming, we're just not ready.
Yeah, which links into obviously after this. The question was then you didn't really talk about Korra stuff. Someone asked on Twitter, "Hey Rachel, can we expect any news on the future of Korra comics this year?" And the answer was, "Hi, we're not ready to announce any details yet, but we are working on the next trilogy. I really appreciate your patience and hope it's worth the wait." So this is actually news. We didn't know because of what happened with Avatar comics that it was going to be a trilogy. We know that now. And people are obviously excited because it means that we're not just stopping everything to do one-shot books, we're actually going to get a continuation with the Korra story. It depends on the story, what exact story they go for, but to me that's good that they're not stopping the Korra comics as well. But there's not really a lot to talk about just yet. This is an announcement we've been waiting for months basically, because again, February was when Runes of the Empire Part 3 came out, and likely this book won't be out until like late 2021. So they'd want to announce it sooner rather than later. But it's nice we know it's a trilogy. But do you have any thoughts on this?
I mean, it's nice to sort of get this little bit of news, but it's really early.
Yeah, that's a lot of this. It was a nice update. They should do this sort of communication a little bit more often, and not leave us waiting for months with no information. But we now have a better sense for what things are, but we also want a better sense for, oh, Mike, what are Mike and Brian up to now because of the whole timeline thing. But yeah, that's all the kind of comic news update stuff. But basically, yesterday, lots of stuff happened out of absolutely nowhere. I don't think anyone really expected this. I don't even know necessarily what the details are around this because like I don't think there's any like toy convention or anything like that on. It just seems like a lot of places announced a bunch of stuff yesterday. And basically over the course of one day we went from having one Avatar action figure line to now we have four Avatar action figure lines and one Korra action figure line. So many announcements yesterday. The first one that came out was McFarlane Toys announced that they have the licenses for both Avatar and Korra and that they'll be doing figures in 2021. They just put out one image. Basically it says Avatar The Legend of Aang. Interestingly, on the image they used the sort of alternate title for the original series, Legend of Korra on the bottom, and then it just says McFarlane Toys in the middle. So we didn't get to see any figures, but if you look into their lineup, they're pretty simple to see what they're doing. They do 7-inch figures, similar in style to Diamond Select, but in my experience, they're a more, I'd say they're a better action figure company than Diamond Select, and they're more respected, have a bigger history of doing figures. So this, to me, looks like it's probably going to be the best of all of the announcements with regards to the quality of figures we're going to get and probably the amount as well, now that they're covering both. But what are your thoughts on this? This was the first one that came out. Avatar, cool, but also the first ever Korra action figure line.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool that they're doing both of them, not just one. I think I don't know, maybe because I like Legend of Korra just as much as I like Avatar, that I always like to see more stuff coming out for Korra, which seems to be not typical favorite on the internet most of the time. So I think that's definitely pretty cool. And yeah, I definitely do sort of agree with that sort of sentiment, at least from looking at the type of figures that all the ones that have been announced so far, that this is probably the one that I personally would be more interested in actually getting, just their toys in general.
Yeah, like I said, they tend to do 7-inch scale. The Diamond Select toys are 6-inch scale. So obviously the problem with the first wave of Diamond Select, and all of them it seems like, is that they're at a small enough scale where they sort of have to do like single jointed elbows, which makes the elbows on their figures kind of useless. But it seems like McFarlane typically have double jointed elbows on all of their figures, and similar levels of sculpting, probably better sculpting and better articulation, and it looks like they commit to doing quite a good amount of accessories. The line to look at from them, if you want a sense for what these figures are like, is that they have a My Hero Academia line, so based on an animation, and a lot of their figures actually look really good. The sculpting on the faces, the paintwork on the faces, the amount of accessories that they do, it seems like it's definitely more along the lines of what we want, and the price is more or less, I think, the same. Like I think Diamond Select figures are like 25 per figure, and it looks like these are actually 20 or 25 per figure. So bigger scale, overall more quality. That seems like exactly what we want. And the fact that they're doing Korra is actually a really big bonus. I noticed that on my videos covering this news yesterday. A lot of people excited for Korra action figures. Which is kind of interesting, given that we still, in the grand scheme of things, don't have a lot of Avatar action figures yet. But people really want a Korra figure, and there's a lot of ground to work with. I suppose we'll go over some speculation on exact figures that we may get in a second. But very quickly after this, because like all of this news, like I caught it like afterwards, and that like I probably could have done one
Hmm.
video covering all three of these announcements, but they just kept coming basically. The second one again, it's just kind of like Avatar hidden in an announcement of other figures that Avatar is coming, but it's still interesting. So this is from a press release from the Loyal Subjects, is the company. Their new action figure line, BST space AXN, pronounced Best Action. They are doing loads of different licenses in this toy line, including what do we have here? Naruto, Lord of the Rings, Full Metal Alchemist, actual music bands and stuff like that, Cowboy Bebop. And then they say in upcoming waves we're going to get TMNT, Gremlins, Starship Troopers, Ozzy Osbourne, and Avatar: The Last Airbender. This line is going to be 1/15th scale, which is a 5-inch scale, and it looks like they have really solid articulation, but single jointed elbows is probably the most notable thing for people who care about articulation. But it seems like they come with a solid amount of accessories and overall look good at the smaller scale. Um, the one thing I would say about this is that it probably looks, with the amount of figures that they're doing, that this is probably a line that will take quite a while to collect a lot of the characters. In that we're probably going to see 2 Avatar figures when they finally announce whatever wave Avatar is in, and then you'll probably have to wait like 6 months to a year for the next group of 2. That McFarlane seemed to be just doing like a whole line of Avatar figures, so we'll probably get like 4 for Korra, 4 for Avatar at once. This will go a lot slower, but it's interesting. They're cheaper, $15.99 for the smaller scale. I think this could be good depending on how exactly they look, and especially with them being smaller, that opens us up to a lot more people. But what are your thoughts on this best action line?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's like it really is sort of like hidden in the text where they actually sort of announced this. But they do have like a bunch of different, sort of like examples of the other stuff that they have coming down the line. So there's a good sort of point of comparison with how they're actually going to look, which I think is good to see. So no, I think it's cool for sure. But yeah, it will be. They are doing a lot. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't expect a lot from them in the beginning for sure.
Yeah, but what I will say is that the articulation on these figures at least looks very usable. The Diamond Select figures are so like stiff, and like if you don't pose them with the stand, they basically don't stand up. Whereas like they have like the Naruto doing like a pretty crazy running like one leg pose, and it's like the other figures can't really do that. So that's pretty good. Um, and then more, I actually just found out this one this morning. There's no real announcement about this. It's just like product listings that people found. But I guess it did just recently go up, and that is it's so generic here, but it's Avatar: The Last Airbender 8-inch Migo figure, and it says in the description, each of them has real fabric clothing, 14 points of articulation, 8 inches tall, made of plastic, real fabric clothing, classic Migo figure style. Now, if I remember correctly, this is a line that was popular quite a few years ago, and then it relaunched relatively recently in the last few years. And so they've picked up a few, I think, new licenses, and like the Best Action line, this is going to be another line that just does a wave of lots of licenses and maybe releases 1 or 2 figures from each license. So this likely is just one figure for now. We don't know what character it is, but if you look at images of these seem like they're going to be probably like the most maybe realistic looking, but probably not the best action figures. Because you can see the difference between like the 5-inch figures saying they have 31 points of articulation. These are saying they only have 14, but they look like they're going to be the only ones with fabric clothing, which for some of the Avatar characters is actually going to look, I think, pretty good. But we'll see exactly how this works. At the very least, we now have like a ton of options for figures, depending on what characters that they do. But do you have any thoughts on the 8-inch Migo figure here?
Yeah, this is probably the most like I guess interesting one, just because it seems like they're doing just because of the history of their figures in general, it's a lot more realistic take on them. Just the clothing, just sort of the way that it seems like they do the sculpts. It seems like it's more towards like I don't know the realistic way that the characters would actually look. So I think that'll be interesting take just to see how they choose to do the sculpt.
Mm. Yeah, because most of their stuff seems like it's based off live action.
Hmm.
I did even have any animated stuff. I'm just having a quick look here.
I mean, they
Uh,
have DC stuff.
yeah. So yeah, Avatar actually might look kind of interesting. I'm not saying they're perhaps going to be the absolute best looking, but um, definitely it's something different, and it's just pretty crazy to think that like there's so many different lines of figures now. The
Mm.
main thing that I saw is just that a lot of people are sort of happy that we don't just have to deal with Diamond Select, which I
Yeah.
suppose people's true feelings about Diamond Select coming out now, and uh, like I said earlier, most people kind of like, okay, McFarlane doing both lines, we expect sort of the most from them. That should be pretty good. And then the smaller scale figures from Loyal Subjects look like they're going to be pretty fun. Not sure how many characters they're going to do with the Migo line, and then like I assume Diamond Select will continue, and it is to their benefit that they're like a year ahead with regards to announcing waves. But I get the feeling McFarlane probably will catch up pretty quickly. So my guess is that if they're doing potentially like four figures for each franchise, that it'll probably be like I'm gonna guess they'll do book three. So book three Aang, book three Zuko, book three Katara, and I guess Sokka would be like the four that they do for Avatar, and then for Korra, I guess it would be Korra, Mako Bolin, and Asami. Maybe Tenzin might sub in there if they do five or something like that. The first wave or two are going to be pretty obvious, I think, for both. But what exact version of each figure they do is going to be more interesting. In that, for Korra, they can do book 1/3 Korra, they can do book two Korra, book four Korra. I think people probably want all of them. So there's that. I probably want book one Mako over like say book four Mako, Bolin. I guess yeah, you probably want book one Bolin, and so on. But yeah, what are some of your speculations? I suppose mainly for the McFarlane line about which figures we're going to see.
Yeah, that's a good question. There really is a lot that they can go with, and I think everyone has like their own favorites. I mean, I don't know. I think for once I would hope that they would start at like the later side of things rather than like always starting with like book one.
Mm.
For the characters. Like I would rather them start even if some of the characters from some of the outfits from book four, like like Mako book four isn't quite as cool as maybe like Mako book one or anywhere else in the middle, per se. But no, I don't know. I think that might be more interesting just to sort of see where they're going to end up. But I guess the other side of it is that like usually the figures and the sculpts and stuff get better sort of like over time. So maybe it would be better to start with the ones in the beginning. But I don't know. Their figures look like and I don't know the development cycle for any of the figures, so I don't know like how long it took any of them to get to the stage that they're at now. But a lot of them look pretty refined at their stage that they're at now. So I mean, if it's on par with some of the stuff that they have now for the initial wave of core ones, and that is book four, like I think that would be pretty happy for most fans.
Mm. And then the main thing would be like accessories. I'm guessing most of the figures will probably come with like open hands and fist hands. Just because I suppose most of the early characters will be benders, but then with Asami, I suppose she'll come with a shot glove hand and stuff like that. Um, for characters like Tenzin, I suppose his design is actually pretty complicated, like in terms of doing it as an action figure, because he has so many like layers of clothing, like way more than like Aang typically has. So there's a lot to go on, but I think Korra is going to work very nicely as a figure. Same with most of the Mako Bolins as well. And then I suppose with Korra, like you immediately have like okay all of the villains like Amon. They probably will want to do a lieutenant perhaps. A Chi blocker, will they actually do some of the more sort of army builder style figures like just Fire Nation soldier, which they did for like the original Avatar toy line. The Fire Nation soldier, I believe, was one of the more popular ones because people wanted a few of them. Unalaq, of course. In book 2, will they do, yeah, all of the Red Lotus? That would be pretty interesting. The thing there would be, of course, scale, in that like Pali would have to be, I guess, at the 7-inch scale, either the only 7-inch figure, or she'd have to be like 8-9 inches or something like that to get her height right, compared to some of the other characters. Like if they did, say, a Jinora figure, they have to get the scale right. Diamond Select have been pretty good about that so far, so we don't know how the rest are going to work with that. And yeah, once they don't get lost with just constantly doing every single like repaint or different costume for specific characters, they should be okay. Because Korra, even just from book 1, has like so many different outfits they could do. Like they have her winter outfit from the very start, her typical outfit, her at the gala, her at the pro bending training, the pro bending outfit. Like I think people will buy a Fire Ferret set that just was the 3 characters on the Fire Ferrets in their pro bending outfits. Yeah. But like that's a special thing you should do. That shouldn't be like a full wave of figures, I don't think. But yeah, like how do you think they'll go about doing that? Like, would they do a wave that is just like the 4 villains, or will they incorporate them in like slowly as they go through?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. I mean, I guess we've seen it before where they've sort of like incorporated them into it, but they could, actually do them all as like their own sort of wave there. But I don't know. I think that we do it like sort of like, space them out over time. Like I don't think the villains, even though that is like such a strong part of the series, I don't think it would be like worth it just to have like a whole set of just them and like their own sort of solo wave. That doesn't seem quite as cool. But I mean, if they did do like, the characters from, book 1 and then did the villain as well, I mean, that seems like that would go hand to hand with me if, that's the amount that they would release at a time. Like, I don't know the typical number that they would release through, a wave per se.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Like even just going back to Avatar, because I think at this point we have so many lines that for me one of the big things is going to be like the first line to do, say, a Mei and a Ty Lee, which I think are really in demand figures that people would really want to see. That characters that would work well as action figures. Because like Ty Lee you'd expect to be like super posable. Mei's going to come with all the knives. I suppose what accessories would Ty Lee come with? That'd be probably the only thing. She come with the stand, obviously, but I don't know. do you have any thoughts on that actually? Like Ty Lee would be a pretty plain figure.
Question. Yeah, I mean, does she really need any accessories? I mean, I guess I don't know.
Yeah, unless they want to do something like do McFarlane Toys do a Build-A-Figure? I don't know. That might be other toy lines, but they can always just put a bending effect part in there. I suppose she'd come with lots of different hands, I guess, for the chi blocking poses.
Yeah, that could work really well. Unless they like threw something from the circus in there, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, they could do that, like a different head sculpt that has her kind of like kind of mask type thing that she wears at the circus in it. She could always come with like a fancy stand, so you can put her in like more acrobatic poses or something. There's options, but it is interesting because the one thing I'd want to know is like, okay, there's going to have to be bending effect parts, and if it is a full on big line, I think that could be really cool to see how they do them in terms of like, Mako comes with like a bunch of like standard normal fire bits, Zuko comes with some of the bigger parts, and like a different Fire Nation character comes with like the fire daggers, and they're mix and match. Because you'd want to build up a collection of like bending effect parts so you can make whatever kind of poses that you want. So it's definitely fun to do that now that we have all that stuff, because Diamond Select were kind of limited with their accessories, as well as the fact that they basically never show them off. Like all the imagery for like the Azula and Aang, which are out in like 2 weeks as far as I'm concerned, we don't see the accessories apart from the fact that Aang comes with a glider. But is that just all the accessories they have? We're not even sure. But yeah, that's been the news. merchandise-wise, it looks like 2021 is going to be quite a good year for Avatar, with a pretty big toy company getting the licenses for both shows, which is going to be exciting. Um, I'm guessing at Toy Fair, which I think is usually in around February, we might see some of this stuff. So that's something to look forward to. But yeah, we're still waiting for some comic announcements. But yeah, from there we'll move into our main topic for the episode, which is reviewing the new comic book that is out this week. Which is Katara and the Pirate Silver, our first one-shot, the first one-shot from the awesome Ladies of Avatar trilogy, as they called it on the stream. Um, yeah, this is a script by Faith Erin Hicks, art by Peter Wortman, colors by Adele Matera, lettering by Richard Starkings and Jimmy Betancourt, and yeah, it's a one-shot, our first one. I suppose overall, Greg, what were your thoughts on the first one shot?
Overall, I think it's a fun, random, in-between story from a fan favorite character. I don't know if it's something that you should or I would expect anything really big out of it. But I think for what they're trying to go for with this story, which is really just like a self-contained story with a fan favorite character. I think it does that job rather well. I don't think there's anything sort of grandiose or anything else about it really.
Yeah, like my thing is basically like this comic is fine. Like I think it's kind of relatively poorly timed. It's not really the book we need right now, given the year that we've had with how popular Avatar is being back on Netflix. This is a kind of relatively like weak first new showing from Dark Horse in that sense. And like you say, I sort of come out of it just feeling like it's not particularly important, and it is to the point where I kind of feel like why did they feel the need to tell this story? Because it's not just that there's an issue with them setting a story during ATLA at a time where nothing can really happen, but it is more the sense that as we go through it, there are kind of a few problems in that they set up a story and then they don't really even resolve anything that happens here. And it makes the comic really feel like they just didn't want to do anything at all. In that it's a 72-page short story, but it feels like it's just like a 20-page, story that we could have had in like The Lost Adventures or something like that. They could have, I think, gone more in depth on both sides of the plot, but they just didn't for some reason. And I think probably worst of all is that for a comic, for them making their decision to set it here to not really, mess with the complicated comic timeline, they get awfully close to making some like pretty simple continuity errors at a few different points in the book. And there's only so far I can kind of really defend the book in terms of like I don't think they really meant to do that, and it feels like they get way too close to a few points. But we'll discuss it as we go through it. But like I said, it's still fine. It's enjoyable. Katara getting a focused story is good. I just don't feel they really do anything with it. Especially they don't do anything that like is new that we didn't already know. But let's get into it. We're going to go through this sort of page by page. So if you have the comic, read along with us because we're going to do it in order pretty much. So we open up in the air on Appa. It's the full group here pretty much. We're obviously set in the middle of book 2, just after the episode Bitter Work, but just before the library. Toph's first line of dialogue makes that very clear. Being chased by a homicidal Fire Nation princess and spending most of yesterday stuck in a hole is the life to you. Because Sokka said this is the life. This highlights that yesterday he was stuck in the hole, which is what Sokka was up to during Bitter Work. And we get into this even further when they directly bring up the fact that Toph has just recently been training Aang in earthbending, which again was what happened during that episode. So the timeline's pretty clear about where it's set, but straight away the first scene gets into, again, it's Toph and Katara at odds with each other here over their different approach. Most of the group wants to be a little bit more optimistic about things, but Toph is not really used to being, followed everywhere basically, and we basically get into this idea that, okay, Toph considers herself to be more tough than Katara is, and she feels that that is a better approach to have in general. We get the addressing of like, but what about the positive reinforcement? She used that, but it was mostly more chucking rocks at Aang's head. And yeah, we get the whole Croco Kitten comparison here, that Toph considers herself a very direct person, and Sokka cuts in and says that Katara is soft and gentle like a Croco Kitten before its skin gets all scaly and so on. Toph brings up the fact that Aang still learned both earth and water bending. The only real difference is when I thought he learned earth bending in a day. It took him, a couple of weeks to learn water bending. And Katara is just really set on the fact that, she doesn't want to be considered like soft. She wants to also be considered tough. And it seems like the rest of the group is kind of like, it's good that you aren't exactly the same as Toph. You are who you are. But Katara takes it as, so why does it feel like it's not okay that I'm not tough? And this is where the sort of plot kicks into play at this point. But what are your thoughts on this sort of introduction scene to the book?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like we've talked about this a bunch before, but I don't know. I guess it's interesting just to see. I mean, this is, they're all together as a group now. This is still pretty new. So I guess it's interesting looking back on this with sort of like hindsight of where they actually, end up, and, how Katara actually is as a character versus how she's currently being perceived in the story here. Because, right now, even though, they know that she is tough, she's not exactly like tough on, people directly unless she really sort of has to. So her, knowing that that's part of like, something that she can do, she just hasn't been able to sort of show that, especially to Toph, who's new to the group, who doesn't really know all of them in general that well. So she's still sort of getting used to the group, getting used to the dynamic of like, always being chased around the world. So I guess it's early times in development here, and just seeing, I guess, Katara still, being a little bit, I guess, sensitive to that sort of aspect, even though, most of the other group has already sort of gotten past that, except for Toph, of course.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's the setup here, is that Toph is only a few episodes into being part of the group. So, like was the case in The Chase, they're bringing up more of their issues of all of the members of the group. It is Toph and Katara who seem the most sort of at odds with each other with their different approaches. The problem here is that like this is the premise for Katara needing to prove that she's tough, when, as we'll go through it, it becomes abundantly clear that Aang and Sokka know she's tough and don't need it to be proved. And then they don't really come back around to this. They don't really bookmark this book with a similar scene to the start as they address, Toph accepting Katara is tough. It just sort of happens, which is kind of weird. And then the other problem, as we've discussed when we've discussed this preview pages before, is that I'm not a big fan of the whole he learned earthbending in a day, it took him a couple of weeks to learn waterbending line, because I think it's really vague about what learning earthbending and learning waterbending actually is, and how it seems to interpret Aang's training of both, especially given that this is like a day after bitter work, and Toph is saying that, oh yeah, he spent a whole day basically not even knowing how to earthbend at all. Yet he does one move at the end, and Toph has completed his training or something like that. He learned earthbending in one day. Whereas, like, didn't Katara teach him, like, a few moves that she knew back in book 1? And he learned them in seconds? Yet, where's this weeks bit coming from? And then you add in the context of, like, Katara was a novice and she still taught him those moves straight away. And then Paku was the one to actually properly start his training, and then Katara took it over, and it's kind of like, I don't really know what we're talking about here in terms of like his mastery level or just using the element, and it just feels a little kind of forced as the way to do it, especially because they're also playing, I think, a little loose with the whole idea of, oh, Toph dismisses how important the positive reinforcement method was in teaching Aang, when I felt bitter work the whole point was that, like, oh, Toph did actually take that on board to be a better teacher, because that's how Aang works as a student, and that he works better that way. And it just feels kind of weird to kind of go back on that in this scene by kind of being like, yeah, I used a little bit of that, but I mainly chucked rocks. I get it's sort of Toph bragging here a bit, but it's just a little, like, this isn't great writing, I don't think. But do you have any thoughts on the what Toph talks about here with the earth bending and water bending and how long it took?
Yeah, I guess it's hard to tell if what they're trying to write here, if it's more just to sort of play it up, or if it's more just them trying to sort of like emphasize more of Toph's personality as far as like just blowing off things that she thought, was important, just, one day ago or anything like that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. This is like early Toph, so maybe early Toph is, more sort of like flip floppy on those sort of things versus later on it seems like she's more, more aware of these things. I mean, all of our characters are pretty young at this point, so, them sort of switching stuff like that, maybe that would actually sort of happen. But yeah, I mean, it does, the whole idea of like what is trained, what is mastery, what is learned. I mean, you could say that Aang probably already knew some waterbending even before he even met Katara, just based off of just, his natural affinity for learning the elements in general, because he's the Avatar and that's what he has to do. So I don't know if that's like, in general, like a good point for, what you're teaching a person who's by default going to learn all the elements, even if it does, some elements will be tougher for them.
Mm. Yeah, because ultimately, like with Bitter Work, it was Aang learning the sort of philosophy of earthbending and him struggling with it because it's opposite to him. He never even needed to learn the philosophy behind waterbending necessarily, because I suppose as an airbender he just adapted to it quite quickly, because the spiraling movements of airbending isn't that far off the kind of push and pull of waterbending, and the fact that they also have sort of, redirection. There's an element of, momentum kind of to that as well. So yeah, it's just a little vague, and because this is the sort of set off point for the plot, it just feels a little forced. But the plot properly kicks into gear when on the ground we see some firebender soldiers with a catapult spotting them. They launch a fireball up at them. Aang dodges on Appa, of course, but because Katara was upset at being called not tough, she wasn't holding on, so she ends up falling off Appa into the kind of river below. So Aang still has to dodge all of these fireballs as Katara falls into the water. We get a whole sequence then as she sort of rushes down the sort of rapids here. She creates an ice sphere around herself to avoid getting bashed by the rocks and protect herself. So she sort of ping-pongs down the river off a waterfall and ends up down by the shore, basically, on a kind of coastal Earth Kingdom town. And she's, she seems relatively okay, but she just sort of hit her head on the way coming out of the ice ball. So that's how Katara gets separated from the group. And of course, they're so focused on the fireballs that they don't really know where she is. So this is the full separation here. So yeah, well, I suppose, what are your thoughts on this full action scene here? I think it's mainly a showcase of how good Peter Wortman's art is, with especially the water.
Yeah, no, I think that is definitely something to note here. Just the way that it's all flows together, I think is done really well, especially with like, just the landscapes, because that's like the whole idea here is that, it's the flowing rapids here. But no, I think it's, it's cool how, she has, the skills now to protect herself, whereas something before this probably wouldn't have turned out as well. So, it's just showcasing more of Katara's skill as well, in this instance.
Mm-hmm. The next scene is that Aang lands Appa once they're free of all the catapults, but they do land sort of nearby. Toph says that she hears something nearby. Sokka comes across then. Oh yeah, they found some of the catapults, so they shouldn't really talk particularly loud here, so they found some firebender soldiers. As they go to sort of retreat away from the catapults, they find one sort of stray Fire Nation soldier out basically having his lunch, and so there's a bit of an awkward exchange here, but he immediately jumps into action, and Toph just immediately takes him out with earthbending, and he comes back, does some firebending, but again, Toph just this time properly encases him in earth. He was trying to get all the glory of capturing the Avatar, but they basically capture him so he doesn't alert everyone else nearby that he's found the Avatar. We then get into him speaking to Aang, and he says, "You may escape today, but tomorrow the Fire Nation will find you. We'll never stop until the world is safe from your malice, Avatar." And Aang is kind of like, "Wait, malice? What did I ever do to you?" And he says, "You know what you did. You and the Air Nomads, you were plotting to take over the world. That's why the Fire Nation had to stop you." And Aang obviously doesn't agree with this at all. And the guy just says that it's the truth, it's a lie, and he wants Aang to prove that it's a lie. And so this is the setup on the other side of the plot. And I think this is actually like a pretty decent setup. I don't think it ends up going anywhere we didn't already know before, but it's at least somewhat interesting is what I'll say. I think part of the problem is stuff like this firebender soldier never gets a name. They don't really name the Earth Kingdom town we're going to deal with. There's just I think a little lack of detail here that is another kind of proof of you don't need to know much about this Fire Nation soldier because we're not going to really do anything with him. But what are your thoughts about the setup on the Aang side of the story?
Yeah, no, I think like we mentioned before, this setup is actually pretty interesting. It's like an interesting side plot. Maybe even actually more interesting than the main plot of the story. Unfortunately, like you said, it doesn't quite go anywhere, which is too bad, which I guess is just sort of, how it had to work in the story. But the idea behind it and, sort of the conflict that you can see that Aang is having here is quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. We go back to Katara, and she realizes, as I said, she's washed up sort of near the shore. And that she's washed up next to basically a barricade, and she wants to know, okay, is this barricade keeping people out or keeping them in? So she then spots some Fire Nation guards in or around this coastal Earth Kingdom town and realizes, okay, it's definitely keeping people in. This is the Fire Nation taking control completely over this kind of port town, so they can do whatever they want with it. A Fire Nation guard spots her and tries to, take her in because she's Water Tribe. And she just basically ice uppercuts him to take him out, and sort of Hitman style, drags him into the bush to hide the unconscious body, and then grabs an Earth Kingdom sort of shawl to wear some green to blend in. So we get a bit of stealth Katara here as she's going through this town. She talks to a guy at one of the stalls and talks about what's with all the soldiers here, and he says no, just the same lot as before. Not that it's doing me any good. Ozai's finest eat like ostrich horses. They've cleaned me out and I can't get any new produce because of their blockade. And just today there's been some nonsense about the Avatar's flying bison being spotted nearby, so they're all extra jumpy. This war is no good for business, and Katara realizes she needs to get out of here as soon as possible, which is when she basically encounters the pirates, which we'll get into in just a second. But what are your thoughts on the setup here with this unnamed Earth Kingdom port town, river town, or whatever?
I mean, I guess it's sort of kind of generic for what we would expect from this time. I guess the interesting part is just that Katara is there all alone, so she has to sort of figure out how to navigate without all the team, or being able to simply just fly over it. Something that of course has happened in the show probably many times. It just happens to be in this case that they actually have to interact with this town. I guess it would have been interesting if it was named in some way, so we could have placed it in the world. I don't know, maybe someone has already figured out where it would be location wise. That might be cool to know. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's just Katara just trying to get the lay of the land and seeing how she interacts with the world when she doesn't have, her brother and everyone else with her.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think this almost speaks to potentially the overall problem with this book is that they're trying to do this thing of Katara needs to prove that she's tough. She's already done it. What's this? 15 pages into the book, surviving the fall off Appa, the run through the rapids, she's on her own and takes out and hides the body of a Fire Nation soldier and is immediately undercover. Like, that's plenty tough. Um, the main problem here is that there's no real conflict, like, at all for Katara, as we'll get into. Like, even as she meets the pirates, the problem here is that the way they do the pirates is that, you know, it's mainly Katara assuming they're really bad, but the book kind of really being like, but wait, it's just Katara thinking they're that way and they're not actually doing anything. So this is where, like, I almost feel like a book like this would have been better if it was set before 118, before Katara has her full training. That way she can prove herself with just her sort of limited waterbending skills, and you can still roughly do a similar thing because you're still basically in or around the Earth Kingdom. It doesn't have to be only Earth Kingdom in Book 2, because they have to go through it to get to the Northern Water Tribe. And I think that's the problem here, is that, like, it's great that Katara gets to be awesome, but we know she's awesome. No one is ever going to make the case that she's not, like, top 5 waterbender in the entire franchise. So what are we kind of proving here, I suppose, is the real question. But I suppose quickly before we move on, did you have any thoughts on that? Just the fact that there isn't much of a conflict for Katara here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the conflict is really just her getting back to where she was to begin with, which I guess is really just sort of like a roundabout way of, telling this sort of mini story. So no, I mean, it's still set in, the real storyline that the original show was going through. So, the conflict is, the war. That's what's still the main issue, regardless of anything that happens with our individual characters. So there's nothing really, I don't know, it's hard except for like certain cases where there's another sort of like major character, point of conflict with someone else, usually from the Fire Nation, is sort of like going to be able to sort of like take major precedence.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, as I said, she then comes across the pirates. They sort of corner her, but like she says here, she knows how to defend herself. And they actually spotted her from afar, taking out the firebender soldier with her waterbending. And they actually want a waterbender because they need to sort of sail down river, and they need a waterbender in case things get hot, basically. And so Katara's like, okay, they're also against the Fire Nation. Maybe I can go with them. And she, plays it coy a little bit. Okay, like, what's going on here? Are you actually gonna, bring me here for free and so on? And she just explains that, yeah, if you protect us, I'll bring you kind of downriver. And she introduces herself and, proves that she's a waterbender by splashing one of the guys on the head. And that's really about it. We get the captain here. She introduces herself. Her name is Jiang, and her ship is called the Flying Wolf Bat. Katara gives her full name properly, normal name, no fake name here for Katara. And Jiang, just to get across that she is somewhat threatening, says that, oh yeah, you're lucky you're an actual waterbender, because some guy said he was, but we got a little upset when he wasn't, and they left him with the saber-toothed moose lion, from, again, a reference to the last episode. And she just says, yeah, he's perfectly fine, and he probably is, but they put him in an awkward position. I think Jiang has a lot of potential as a character. I thought the character just ended up coming across like a little plain, that they give a backstory as we go through this, but it's a very sort of simple, basic backstory that is like, okay, sort of like history as, I suppose, basically Dao Fei, but they don't really go into the fact that that's the case. But because we know that now, that's the way to really view her. They touch on some ideas later on, but this is the thing here. Like, she's not really a threat to Katara, and she never really comes across that way. So it never really feels like Katara is in that much of an awkward position with the pirates. She just kind of like, as she's on her own, ends up getting sort of involved in some stuff that she's not quite fully in control of, but she's completely in control ultimately, and it's kind of a weird situation. But what are your thoughts on the introduction to Jiang and the other unnamed members of her crew?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I guess I I guess that's probably like the whole point of it in general. Is just like, we do know what these pirates are actually about by the end of the book, but I guess even from sort of like the initial stages here, the crew, I don't know, they seem like a really sort of like a nice crew of pirates compared to sort of what we've seen before, where they were definitely, not exactly the most sort of like upstanding citizens, even though these ones are pirates. And from the introduction here, and Katara's like, I have to be tough and all this stuff. These definitely seem like the nicer side of pirates. So maybe that's probably a lot of the reason why the threat level of them is just like not there at all. Which I guess it doesn't really help the whole point of the story of Katara has to be really tough in these sort of situations. It's just not quite there yet. And I don't think they were ever meant to be the main sort of like antagonists of Katara in this sort of situation. But I guess in terms of like making this seem like it's a dire situation is definitely not there yet.
hmm we move back over to the other plot, so it's the captured Fire Nation soldier, Aang, Toph, and Sokka talking. So Aang wants to stop here for a little bit and try and talk to him, convince him that he's wrong, change his mind. And Toph is kind of like, why? He's a Fire Nation soldier. He'll turn us over if he gets free. And Aang says the Fire Lord wasn't content with wiping out the air nomads. He also spread lies that we had a secret army, that we were a threat to the entire world. I can't believe people think these lies are truth, but they do. Um, and Sokka's like, of course it is, but, and he just points out he does. I have to tell him he's wrong, even if I only change one mind in the Fire Nation. Isn't that worth doing? And he's like, I know Katara's lost and we have to look for her. We don't have time for this, I know. And Sokka's like, no, I was going to say this guy's clearly an idiot. You sure you want to try talking to him? And they're ultimately pretty okay with it because Sokka says Katara can take care of herself. And then Toph is like, you just said she was as soft and cuddly as a croco kitten. And he says, I was teasing her. It's what I do. It's my job as her big brother. Also, you have seen a croco kitten. Sure, they're pretty helpless at the beginning, but once their scales come in, they could take down a full-grown platypus bear. And he just points out, maybe not a full one, but like a half-sized one. So, again, even on the other side of the story, this is a case of she doesn't have to convince most of the group that she's tough. They already know. So it's only Toph that needs convincing. But again, they're not really going to come back to that. I like what they're doing here in terms of I get why Aang would want to, upon hearing this and having an opportunity to just talk to a random soldier who they have control over, try and talk to him. That he seems to be like afraid of airbenders and think they're capable of these crazy things, so why not try and convince him that he's wrong? The problem with this, I think, is that this feels like probably the most blatant continuity error in the book, in that is it not an error that Aang knows back here in relatively early book 2 that the Fire Nation believes that the air nomads had an army, when in the headband the teacher asks him the question. I think I have the transcript up here. Yeah, question 1. What year did Firelord Sozin battle the Air Nation army? Kuzan, Aang answers the question. Is that a trick question? The air nomads didn't have a formal military. Sozin defeated them by ambush. And if you watch the scene, Aang kind of answers the question as in like he's hearing it for the first time, and it's just like, are you lying to me here? So it kind of feels weird that he actually already knew this beforehand, that the Fire Nation considered the air nomads to have a military. It's a relatively minor point, but again, given the scope of this book, you expect them to get what details they do cover correct, and this feels like the most blatant error in the book. And given that they're not going to actually expand on really any of this for the most part, apart from a few little references, why are you even getting that close to the other stuff? Which again highlights that, they are really just like cramming a story into this spot because it's kind of free, and they didn't have a lot to do with it. But what are your thoughts on Aang making the decision here to talk to this guy?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like a Aang type of thing to do, if he has like a second to sort of change one mind or anybody's sort of like opinion, that he'll go to lengths to at least attempt to do it. Whether it'll be successful or not is something to definitely be seen. And definitely this character doesn't make it easy for him to attempt it. But it's core to his character, so it's not out of character for him to do. Should he, will this sort of like mess up other things later on, or did he somehow forget that he had this sort of conversation? That's interesting to see how that actually plays out in the like, grander scheme of things. So I don't know. I think the whole idea of this, we were wondering like, how was this going to affect things? Because, they can't really do anything because it'll affect too much other stuff. So I don't know, it's interesting to see how they attempt to do it and not mess it up, but it's a tough thing to do for sure.
Mm. Like, I think the other path they could have taken with this is that the comic Relics takes place in book one. So Aang would know the Fire Nation's approach to hunting down anyone who escaped the initial
Yeah.
genocide, and they could have linked that in a way or something like that, that he could have like taken out one of the items and told the story of relics or something like that, and used that as a sort of counterpoint or something. But we get into then the conversation that he has with the guy. So he comes up and of course is like, "Flamio, my good hot man. I know we've met under difficult circumstances, but that's no reason not to get to know each other." The guy has a leaf on his forehead, so he uses airbending to blow it off, but this just scares the guy, and he's like, "Get away from me with your demon air powers, Avatar." And Aang's just like, "I won't hurt you, it's just airbending. It's a part of the balance of our world." And the guy says, "I know all about the dark abilities you airbenders had, how you could suck a man's breath out of his body, how you had an army of winged people ready to attack anyone who threatened you." And Aang's just like, "The air nomads were peaceful monks. We never had an army. We don't even eat meat. And we can't fly. We can only glide with the help of gliders." Um, and he says, "And where's your glider now, Avatar?" And he's like, "It's on my flying bison." And he's like, "Ha, see? There. You have an animal that flies. If the Fire Nation hadn't stopped you, you'd have conquered every nation in the world from the backs of your winged beasts." And he's like, "Who told you that?" Um, and so the guy revealed he has all this information, and he got it from his cousin, who got it from his sister, who got it from her roommate, who read it on a poster in some town out west. And Aang's like, "And you don't think that something written on a poster might be untrue? Why would the Fire Nation write untrue things on a poster? They cost a fortune to print." And so Aang realizes he's not going to convince him that he's wrong, and we get a "that's rough, little buddy" from Sokka. So I think that the dialogue here is fun, but also what it accomplishes in the story doesn't feel that great. That they kind of just dismiss any sense of sort of learning anything, or we can actually convince this guy with a joke. Um, but I like the references here of like sucking the breath
Yeah.
out of someone's body, because that kind of almost like makes Apiko feel a little bit more canon. Because if you consider him to be canon, the Fire Nation would know that airbenders do have this ability because he was using that on the battlefield to suck air out of people's lungs, and so it would go down in sort of history as an ability that they had. And then I suppose the Fire Nation, who will go on, I suppose at this point, are developing the power of like air power. They would view a massive threat as being the nation who all of them have sky bison and they can all sort of fly, quote unquote, from their perspective. So I do like that. But it also makes me sort of consider like, okay, Aang is a master airbender, kind of being like, we can only fly with the help of our gliders. And then I always look back on like beginnings and I'm like, but you sort of have like relatively beginner airbenders doing the sort of flying Nimbus cloud surfing technique like straight away, like the lost early technique of airbending. That doesn't seem like a master level move. That was basically flight, so that's just kind of adds to that. But what are your thoughts on the conversation Aang has with the Fire Nation soldier?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Afiko, because of course I think of Korra and how that actually worked with Zahir and his sort of abilities there, and even sort of like the history of airbenders, which we're assuming Aang taught Tenzin. So, there's sort of whole idea of there were airbenders in the past who, if they did let go of themselves enough, they did actually gain the ability of unaided flight. So not even going so far as back as, beginnings where they had the whole flying Nimbus cloud, there were, potentially other airbenders that had the ability to fly. So I don't know, I don't know, those seem like details that maybe, they didn't think about putting in here or considering. I mean, I like, I like the idea that they have it in the story here, something that Aang, as a character, even if, he wasn't completely thinking about like, the full scope of, airbending history. I mean, he is the kid here and he's not necessarily trying to think of the history. He's more just trying to convince this, one potentially idiotic firebender from his, current, perspective. But it's not going to work, at least from this perspective, just because of how he views his sources of information and just sort of how the Fire Nation has trained and taught their subjects, which is a hard thing to compete against, especially when it's sort of ingrained. So this is something that I guess Aang is seeing firsthand how this is not going to turn out well.
Mm. Yeah, and I did see a few people sort of complaining, like, oh yeah, like, why doesn't Aang know about the weightlessness technique, the Gurulahima technique, and so on? Why does he not really address the whole sucking air out of people's lungs, given that he's a master airbender? And I think this is something where I'm perfectly fine with letting the book away with it, and that like Gurulahima is established to be the like only airbender prior to Zahir to ever unlock that ability. He's also pretty much stated to sort of be, I suppose, to a degree, a little bit of an outcast with his views within the Airbenders, and is from like thousands of years ago. So he's likely not super well known. That technique and how you accomplish it wouldn't be particularly well known. Similarly, a technique that only exists to basically kill someone, why would Aang necessarily know about that? As a master airbender, he likely knows that you can do sort of like vacuum-esque moves, and we've seen him do that before. Like he does the whole kind of gun barrel thing in 106 with the coal. That kind of works in a similar way.
Yeah.
So he likely knows that this is possible, but they're peaceful. Would any of them ever do it? Obviously, the idea is that he technically was at the same temple as Afiko, if Afiko is considered to be canon, but likely never saw that technique because, of course, he wasn't around when the genocide happened, and Afiko actually betrayed everyone. But yeah, I'm perfectly fine with a lot of that stuff. But yeah, Aang ends up not really getting anything accomplished here. We move back over to the Katara side of the story. So she's walking with Jang and the rest of the crew, and she suddenly decides that, okay, no more Croco Kid and Katara, gotta be tough. What would Toph do? And so she decides to act really tough, like Toph. And so she spits on a wall, and the others are like, do they have any manners? And then she realizes that, like, oh, I'm going a little bit overboard here. Which I guess is her realizing that, no, she's handled herself pretty well up to now. She doesn't need to be more than what she's already being. So they stop at a guy called Tu, who's kind of supplying the goods here that they're going to transport down river. And so they announce that they have a real waterbender. Interestingly, this guy is kind of like, I think I recognize you. My cousin O sails on a ship not far from Crescent Island. He told me he ran into a waterbender girl with hair loops who stole a very valuable waterbending scroll from him. And so, again, this is a situation where like Katara handles herself like very well here. Without needing to be super tough-like. And he says, maybe. My cousin also told me the girl thief was traveling with the Avatar, and she just threatens him with an ice dagger and just says that, that's a lie, that's not the case. The cousin O is obviously Barker O, who I believe is like the first mate of the pirate captain's crew. Interestingly, he gets a name, but the pirate captain doesn't get a name. He's the guy with the smoke bombs. Who's the other one who seems to talk mostly on the pirate crew. So interesting that we get to meet his cousin here. So that's at least a pretty nice detail reference. And so yeah, they pick up the cargo, and we find out that they stole this from an Earth Kingdom patrol a few weeks ago, and they need to move it out of here. And Jang says, the Earth Kingdom army is stretched thin from fighting the Fire Nation. They're easy pickings for us. And so Katara has a little bit of a kind of issue with this, of like, why are you taking from the Earth Kingdom given that the Fire Nation is taking over places? And she just says, no questions goes both ways, Katara. You want to ride down that river, take your own advice. So she has to put on an Earth Kingdom disguise here to avoid getting caught here. And they're going to pose as Earth Kingdom collaborators and slip out from under the noses of the Fire Nation. And they hope to be miles away and counting their silver before they realize what's happening. And this is when Katara kind of panics a little bit, realizing that, oh, we're going to have to like basically sneak through this blockade here a bit. And so she gets a little bit anxious going into this. I will also say here that anytime Jiang mentions silver prior to the reveal of what it actually is, feels kind of weird reading it the second time, in that it feels a little forced that, basically all of the scenes with Jiang are like, I'm going to get money for doing this. I'm going to get money for doing this is what you're meant to believe. And then they're just like, silver isn't what you thought it was. And it just feels a little weird reading it again, that like, it's not the greatest twist in the world. But, it brings up the idea of like, okay, we're at least dealing with a little bit of a gray area here of the stuff we're putting downstream here, we're bringing downstream, was taken from the Earth Kingdom army, not the Fire Nation army. So how do we deal with that? How does Katara deal with this? And this is another reason why she's kind of not particularly comfortable in this situation. But they'll address it a little bit as we go forward. But what are your thoughts on more of the setup for the exact plan here for the pirates?
Yeah, I mean, the setup, I guess, is enough for what they're trying to do here. I mean, it's another instance where, Katara can show that she's tough by, proving that she isn't with the Avatar, that she is just like a solo person, just sort of trying to do this. I like that they have the reference to, the pirates from before, and the fact that she does the little like water tribe, I'm watching you, as she leaves, sort of the guy's sort of main area there. But yeah, I mean, I guess this was really the point that we were waiting for to happen in the story, is just where is she going to have, sort of the real sense of conflict. I mean, I guess looking back at it now is still like not like the greatest, sort of conflict or threat sort of issue overall. But, it's enough to where, it's something that Katara isn't fully comfortable with doing. No, I wonder if it would have switched if this was like Fire Nation goods that they were, stealing rather than Earth Kingdom. So, maybe there might have been even more of a reason for her to not take as much issue with it, or I don't know, that would just be interesting to see how she feels about that as a character. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting, the whole idea of the silver and sort of what that really is versus what she thinks it is in the beginning. But I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because it's like, it seems like it's a threatening sort of situation, but you can also see like the pirates aren't necessarily like, it doesn't feel like this is like a super dire situation yet.
Because the other thing is like counting our silver, when in the end they're given like, what, 3 flowers in the end? So it's not even that they get like a big box of like flowers in the end. So that's why it feels very much like, reading it the second time, it feels very forced to hide sort of Jiang's like real approach in all of this. I think it could have been written a little bit differently. We'll get to the reveals when they come out. We come back to the Fire Nation soldier. So Aang has failed. So Sokka's going to take an attempt here. Toph still doesn't really want to be involved in this. So he says, Aang's method of disarming friendliness didn't work, so let me try some cold hard facts at this guy. He'll turn on the old Sokka charm. So he just comes at him and he's like, my good hot man, even if you don't believe what Aang told you about the air nomads, we don't have to be enemies. And he says, as long as you stand against the Fire Lord, you are my enemy. And Sokka's like, that's the thing, we don't want to be the Fire Lord's enemy. We'd actually love to live in harmony with him and the rest of the Fire Nation. And he's like, what? For example, isn't it a bit odd that you're Fire Nation, but you've been sent to the Earth Kingdom to occupy it? And he's like, of course not. The Fire Nation is sharing its wealth and achievements with the rest of the world. The other nations should be honored that we're here. And he says, think about it. Think about that for a moment. Do Earth Kingdom citizens welcome you into their homes? Did they open the gates of Ba Sing Se to the Fire Nation armies? And he's like, well, no, not at first. Have you considered that maybe, just maybe, the rest of the world would also like to live in harmony with the Fire Nation the way it did for centuries? But the Fire Lord would rather attack and dominate the world rather than live peacefully alongside the other nations? And the guy thinks about it for a second and is just like, no, Fire Lord, my flame burns for thee. So he basically quotes Fire Nation Man, actually, from the Earth Rumble there a little bit. And Sokka does a face palm here. And immediately they go to leave. We've just wasted our time banging our heads against that rock. Let's get out of here on Appa. So this guy frees himself from the earth and he says there's no escape. But this time Appa grabs him in his mouth and shoots him into the trees. And they do actually leave on Appa at this point. So they're going to actually resume the search for Katara at this point. I do think this scene with Sokka is one of the more kind of fun parts of the book, just seeing that he really takes a highly logical approach and he thinks he sort of has the guy, but then no, the guy just is completely loyal to the Fire Nation. He doesn't care about anything else. Again, I think they did the same thing again, where they present an interesting idea and kind of cut it short with humor, when I think they're almost avoiding properly addressing the issue here more than the humor really needing to be here necessarily. But what are your thoughts on Sokka's approach here?
I mean, I like his approach. For Sokka and his character personality and what he would sort of go for, it totally feels like what he would actually do, him sort of going on sort of his detective sort of logical sort of idea, him being sort of the planning guy. So his approach is good. I think it's just unfortunate that the person that they're trying to convince is just completely loyal to the Fire Nation and, doesn't have the capacity to sort of see around sort of the current sort of issues here. So it's not something that's going to work. And I think the whole idea of bringing this up is it's a really cool sort of idea and topic. Is something that we don't really get a lot of actually interacting with regular Fire Nation citizens, and this is one case where we get it. But I think this is on purpose the character that isn't going to be swayed in any sort of way. I ultimately get what they're going for. It's just that they try as hard as they can to convince him, but they realize they can't actually do anything. So the only way to stop people like this is to end the war ultimately. But I also feel like it would have been more interesting to take the approach of what if they actually got through to this guy? Then all of a sudden this character is quite interesting because he, I suppose, would be another deserter along the lines of Zhang and those other firebenders in that episode. But like I said, they sort of touch on an interesting topic, then are like, nah, humor, and we just move on. And we'll see when this guy comes back that they kind of just rinse and repeat the same sort of idea. But back with Katara, they arrive down at the dock basically, so we get to see the flying wolf bat, the ship, for the first time. Jiang says that she's been in my family for generations. I grew up on this river, sailing it freely before the Fire Nation invaded. Katara asks, so your family were what, river traders? You could say that. And Katara says, let me guess, they weren't terribly interested in the trading part. They took what they wanted from other ships and sold the goods for a profit. From where I come from, there's a name for people like that: pirates. Jiang says, a good guess. I'm not ashamed of my upbringing. It made me strong. When the Fire Nation took over this area, they commandeered every ship they could get their hands on, all except mine. I rallied my crew and we fought them off together. My crew isn't much to look at, but they're dedicated. I'll do what I must to make sure they remain free, even if it means stealing from your own people. And again, I think this line here is one of the more interesting lines in the book. The Earth King's army aren't my people. The Earth Kingdom has abandoned those outside the walls of Ba Sing Se. We're on our own. Now let's make fools of the Fire Nation, as they move to obviously get through onto the ship. But I suppose we'll talk about this. This isn't but the full
Jiang backstory, but at least it's some of it. And basically, my interpretation of this is that, like, okay, she basically comes from like a kind of Dao Fei family, is probably the best way to say it, that sort of adds depth to the character here. And then her line about the Earth King's army feels really, really Dao Fei also, with the idea being that, like, okay, she ultimately wants the Earth Kingdom to win the war over the Fire Nation, but she also acknowledges that the Earth army is the Earth King's army, and he really only cares about, or I suppose at this point, Long Feng really only cares about protecting Ba Sing Se. And the small towns like this one we're dealing with here don't really matter to the Earth Kingdom army. And you address with the fact that stuff like Zuko alone and the whole issue with the Earth Kingdom kind of army slash thugs that we had in that episode, that's kind of what they're dealing with here. Of like, they don't mind minorly affecting the war between the Fire Nation and the Earth Kingdom because they value protecting the actual people they care about in this region more than everywhere else. And I think this works really well with a lot of what like Jonju was talking about in Rise of Kyoshi, when he talked to like I think it was to Kyoshi about like the problems with the Earth Kingdom, and that, you know, different parts, it's such a big nation, the different parts are barely connected, so you need people like this to defend specific areas. So, you know, at the very least, you know, that's the role sort of Jiang serves here, as sort of like, in a way, ultimately the protector of this kind of area, which that's probably the main thing I end up kind of liking from this character coming out of this book. But what are your thoughts on the first bit of Jiang backstory here?
Yeah, it's interesting to think of it in that way, as far as like her being the protector of the region, just because of, you know, how spread out it is, and how Ba Sing Se is like really the only sort of like, or at least considered like the main location. So everywhere else is sort of left to fend for their own here. And I don't know if this is like a wholly like just sort of like a her type of perspective from her, you know, potentially having sort of like a Dao Fei sort of background, or just being, you know, just a regular, you know, pirate, whatever that would sort of like entail in the Earth Kingdom here. I mean, I could see that perspective coming from any of the Fire Nation citizens in this town, not just her from her position of, you know, some power or some sort of, you know, independence that she has from the type of line of work that she particularly is in. I feel like that could probably be like a general statement here. It's just that all the towns are sort of left to their own, and the ones that are more further out, or who have been, you know, occupied by a Fire Nation earlier, have felt more of the burn of the war than any other place here. So it seems like something that would be, no, I would think would be pretty common in general. But no, I think the idea of having this sort of like very sort of mini backstory, no, it works enough for what they're going for in the story, as far as just why she, you know, have any sort of a sense of autonomy here where everyone else has already been taken over.
Yeah, like in a way, this ends up sort of feeling like, you know, kind of a kind of Painted Lady style story, but with Jiang and the kind of role of the Painted Lady versus Katara. But what ends up happening next is that they go to the Fire Nation officer, they give him all the kind of papers to get through. They obviously want to look at this, but as they walk by, they realize, like, okay, you're going to have to, you know, show your worth here as a waterbender here. And quickly the guy realizes, okay, arrest them. We tried to take this ship earlier this year and they resisted. And okay, so the fight is on. So everyone's on the boat. Katara is forced into action. And pretty much straight away, she's like invincible here, basically. She just like goes crazy with the water bending. She completely like takes everyone off their feet on the dock. This gets the boat moving like straight away. Like, none of the firebenders can do anything to her. Just water whip, takes two people out, runs up an ice ramp to get back on the ship. We see that Jiang is very set on making sure they get all the cargo, including the stuff that fell into the water. And yeah, Katara and Jiang pretty much take out all the soldiers that make it on board the ship. And yeah, they just kind of move on from here. They have to block the fire blasts. The boat takes a bit of a kind of pummeling here. And Katara's wondering, like, why are you focusing so much on uh, the goods? Like, shouldn't you care more about like helping the people? But obviously they'll address this a bit later on. So Katara goes even crazier here, and a lot of ice stuff here. She completely stops one of the boats in the water with a combination of ice and water bending. She basically sends all the people out to sea with a wave. Um, and yeah, everyone sort of moves on. They manage to pretty much get their way out. Katara, grabs another boat that they have to sort of move on over to, because the wolf bat basically sinks at this point. So this is the kind of clearest example of like just crazy situation. Katara solves it just straight away. There's no problem. There's no real threat here whatsoever. Katara just saves, dominates the day. Amazing display of water bending. It's really impressive, but it's also like, yeah, and you're trying to convince me, book, that there's a issue here with Katara being tough. Because again, we go back to the start of this sequence, and it's Katara saying to herself, be tough like Toph. And I just don't connect any of what she's doing with her kind of feeling that way. So that just feels a little weird. But what are your thoughts on this giant action sequence here?
Yeah, I mean, this is like the best location that she could be in for, having any sort of conflict with anybody else. I mean, she's in the water fighting against firebenders who are obviously at a disadvantage, and she just, she's completely OP at this point. So there's, it doesn't even look like she's trying most of the time here. Like, she's progressed far enough in her waterbending skills now to, where nothing, all the moves that she's trying to do here, even the one time where she mentions like, come on boat, work with me, because she has to commandeer the other ship, which is made out of metal versus the other one was made out of wood. Like maybe that posed like a little bit of issue of her sort of getting it to move forward. But once she starts it on its way, there's like no issue here. I mean, it feels like if she probably knew the worth of the contents of what was in the water and like sort of like the original goal, like she probably could have brought all of the contents back onto the new boat without any sort of issue. She just, she didn't know the reason behind, what they were actually doing at this point here. So yeah, I mean, she's, has no issue here. It doesn't even look like she has to like actually act tough. She just has to do what she would normally do, and she's completely fine.
So then we see our Fire Nation soldier come out of the woods here, right down by the port, and he spots Katara and is like, "Glory to the Fire Nation, I won't let you escape, collaborators of the Avatar." Katara hears this and is like, "Oh, Aang must be nearby." And as he jumps to try and get at their ship, she just immediately ices him and has him like taken out basically. And this is when they're now on a Fire Nation ship, so they have access to a catapult. They use the catapult to chuck a rock, and they take out one of the other Fire Nation ships. This causes the ice thing that they put the Fire Nation soldier in to crack, and he falls into the water. And he says someday he'll have his revenge for the Fire Nation, and this basically frees them up to go down river. Zhang thanks her, and at this point we discover what the items are that they're actually transporting. So these bottles of medicine that Katara says, "This isn't contraband, this is medicine. I used to help my gran prepare these herbs all the time back in the Southern Water Tribe." And she says, "You're even worse than I thought. You're going to make sick people pay for this medicine. How could you be so cruel?" And Zhang just says, "As you said, Katara, I'm a pirate, and a pirate never does anything without payment. I'll make plenty of silver from what's in these crates." And Katara is very kind of frustrated by this, but as we've said already, it just feels weird that Zhang is written so coyly, basically, here, when she's actually this very reasonable person. So it's just like, are you just letting Katara just say all this stuff about you when it's not actually the case? It just feels a bit weird, especially when, in my opinion, the twist with what the silver actually is doesn't really mean all that much, and I think they think it means a lot more in the writing of this than it actually is. But what are your thoughts on this twist that they are actually just, I suppose, they're bringing medicine downriver?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think, without like hindsight, how like surprised would I have, or was I about this? And I don't know. I don't know. And this probably goes back to what we sort of stated in the beginning. It's just the story flows so quickly that you almost sort of like combine it all together as far as like the different beats of the story. Since there's not, anything of particular sort of like super detailed throughout this whole story, it sort of flows together. So it almost sort of just, the character and the way that she acts, while it's not like particularly, it doesn't feel, menacing in that sort of way that even if she was sort of like selling this contraband, that it would be sort of like the worst thing in the world. At least that's how it comes across to me in general for this sort of part here.
Mm.
But I don't know. It's a interesting one to
Like
consider.
I think the problem I have is that once they get there, they don't try to hide like at all that they're just giving it away. So why doesn't Jang, once she realizes Katara's a nice person, just say that like it's basically a relief mission? um, and that's why it feels very forced in that like all the scenes with Jang saying silver when she actually means that like
Mm,
I'm giving it to them for free just feels like Jang like just like trolling Katara basically of just like she thinks I mean money but I actually mean flowers lol and it just makes the character feel a bit like weird because like you said like she's not particularly threatening and like they're trying to say that like oh you're a pirate look at all the stuff that you do but even the backstory is kind of like she just defended herself from being attacked by the Fire Nation and is like one of the only captains to do so and they're trying to make money by kind of taken from the Earth Kingdom instead of the Fire Nation. And it's kind of like, okay, you're touching on some interesting ideas, but it's not really particularly in depth. But we had a quick one page here with everyone on Appa. So they find the nearby town, of course, and where the barricade is, and they're like, oh, Katara must have been there because there's like ice all over the place. So let's keep following this up the river. So they're now on the track just like Katara is. I don't think there's really much to talk about there. So we cut to them arriving at the town they're here to deliver the medicine to, and immediately a boy walks down the steps holding some flowers and is like, Jang, Jang, you came back. And he hands the flowers to Jang and says, I picked these for you. And she says, thank you. Thank you, Lian, Lian. I love this color. And she immediately goes up to Katara. What do you think? It's payment enough, isn't it? And Katara's like, what? I told you we'd be paid in silver. The silver lily only grows in this area. You're taking flowers as payment for the medicine? These are my Earth Kingdom people. What sort of a person would I be if I demanded money they didn't have as payment for curing their sick? And Katara says, you'd be a pirate. So we'll stop there just because like this is the reveal we've sort of been talking about for a while now. It just feels like really on the nose of just like kind of like sledgehammer levels of like you like Katara you thought that she meant money but she actually didn't. See here she's actually a good person and it's like well she didn't really come across as particularly threatening. I didn't really know what I was meant to think about the character. And in the end like the reaction to this is just like oh so you're not actually like as bad as other pirates basically you're just like a nice pirate is the net result of this. But what are your thoughts about this as like the big twist in the story, if you can even call it that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe they should have like drawn it out a bit more or, had earlier scenes where she did seem, more sort of threatening. I mean, if we were to like compare this with like, the other pirates that we actually do know from the series, like if they were to sort of like flip sides, then it would be seen as like a pretty big thing, just because of how, those characters were written, how they came across throughout the story and how they were really just like doing it for the money as far as we can tell versus here and this crew, I guess even from like the onset, they just didn't have the same sort of mentality. I don't know, maybe it's because some of the characters look younger in her crew versus the other ones looked older, so maybe that was sort of like the angle that they were coming from. I mean, the other sort of like person that was in the crew that we saw earlier on seemed like he would have been someone that would have been in the other pirate crew. So maybe having him speak more, I don't know if he's the second mate or whatever, would have made it seem more threatening than, Zhang and some of the other characters. So yeah, I mean, as a reveal, I mean, it's nice, but it doesn't really hit as sort of hard as I don't know, as maybe they thought it was going to hit, or maybe that wasn't their goal to begin with. I don't know. It's hard to
Mm.
tell.
Yeah, because I think the other thing is that, like, okay, named flower, that's cool. We don't know have too many named flowers in the Avatar universe, and there's nothing special about it. Like, I wish there was like even something to like, okay, this flower is special for this reason. It's not like super valuable, but it you can use it for something. Because like obviously she's only given like a couple of them, so like it would have been just nice to have like something, because it just makes the title of this book feel like this like massive in joke that means like very little. And I think that's so weird to sort of reflect on, that the book's called Katara and the Pirate Silver, and it's just like the writers laughing to themselves. It's just like they think it's a treasure hunt or something like that, when it's actually just this weird twist to prove that the character who wasn't even that bad isn't bad, and so on. But anyway, she gives her full backstory at this point. Um, okay, you'd be a pirate, and I was for many years. Sailed the rivers, took what I wanted, sold it for profit, but that was before the Fire Nation invaded. I may be a criminal, but I'm still Earth Kingdom, and so is my crew. We swore an oath to fight the Fire Nation, at least until the war is over. We made a pact to help our people above all. And Katara says, and when the war is over, we haven't decided yet. We need to find a new ship, for one thing. And she walks off with Lian, and Katara just sort of smiles. And this is when Appa lands nearby, and she's reunited with everyone. So I think the thing here is like this backstory. We get like 2 panels here of just her like leading the ship, but it didn't really tell us anything that we didn't like just see really. It's nice to know that like okay, there's the whole kind of gray area of like stealing from the Earth Kingdom army, but that no, they are committed to fighting against the Fire Nation to protect their area of the Earth Kingdom and the towns nearby. So like okay, good pirate. That's the basic result of this, and that the character has sort of changed from the past, when she was more like the pirate Katara thought she was initially. I think they maybe should have shown her actually doing some sort of bad stuff a little bit more, and potentially found some sort of a way to be like, okay, the Fire Nation invading is a good reason to change that approach, but was there some specific event, personal event to her that maybe
Hmm.
really hit that home? That would have been something that really helped the plot come together. It just feels like these 2 flashback panels here are almost like a waste. Like, why are they in this different coloring scheme when they're more or less identical to actual scenes from earlier on in this book? But what are your thoughts on this bit of backstory here?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not the most sort of detailed sort of story. I mean, I guess I don't know, as far as like people in their sort of position, they have like the moral sensibility to see that, there are other people that are doing worse off, and that, they have, some modicum amount of power to actually sort of influence and change things. So they decided that that's what they were going to do. And, their crew is just sort of inclined to that sort of way. So I don't know. I mean, is it enough of a backstory to really sort of justify them turning? Maybe it is. I mean, there could have been more for it for sure, but I don't know. This whole story is so sort of short here. It's like where would they have fit that in, to actually sort of give us more of that sort of depth here? I think that would have definitely helped us give it a bit more sort of reasoning, or maybe something to show more of their sort of like threat that they actually had on the seas. Maybe that might have adds more, credibility to them being really sort of like menacing sort of pirates of what we would typically think of. I mean, I don't know if that would have retroactively made things seem more sort of serious. Probably not, but it could have been something, for example.
Hmm. Okay, so like I said, Appa arrives, Aang and Sokka hug Katara, and then we also get Katara hugging Toph, and Toph says, yes, okay, hugs are acceptable under the circumstances. So, how did you find me? We saw a Fire Nation ship frozen a ways upriver. We knew it had to be you. How did you get here? So, this is her telling the group what she's just been through. First, I fought a Fire Nation soldier and knocked him out using waterbending. Then I got trapped in a village occupied by the Fire Nation. I knew how I had to escape, but how? I joined a crew of pirates who turned out to be pretty okay people, for pirates. And together we broke through a Fire Nation blockade. And Sokka's like, what? Pirates? You joined a pirate crew? They put their pirating on hold to fight the Fire Nation, so they're former pirates, but yes. And Toph says, I find this very hard to believe. And she's like, it's what happened. Aang, you believe me, don't you? And he's like, I want to. And then Sokka says, Katara, I believe that you think you joined a pirate crew, but let's be realistic. And she's like, I am being realistic. It actually happened. Which is when Jiang comes back over and is just like, Katara, we want to thank you for your help getting down the river. We couldn't have done it without you. We'd like to make you an honorary member of our crew. And she just says, I'm honored, Jiang, and I hope you'll consider becoming a law-abiding citizen once the war is over. We'll see about that, but it might be time for me to retire. I'm getting too old for these little adventures. If you ever get tired of fighting besides the Avatar, there's a job as a pirate waiting for you. So this is her proof that she actually did everything that she said she did. You were saying, and Sokka just says, I was just saying you're the coolest sister in the world. And Katara just ends the book by saying, yeah, I know. So, I think the issue I have here is that we started off with it being an issue between Toph and Katara, and it being about Katara needing to prove that she's tough, mainly to Toph. So it feels weird that basically Toph is like the one character who really doesn't speak that much in this like last few pages of the book. In that we get, I find this very hard to believe, and that's really it. Like she really doesn't react once it's proven to be actually true. Which to me is the whole payoff of this book, is actually getting Toph's reaction to being like, well, I guess I kind of judged you wrong, or I guess you can be tough. Just even if it's as simple as that, the most, cookie cutter end to this plot. But it to me, it borderline leaves the book without a resolution. Like, why does Sokka say the last line? It just feels a bit weird. The other thing that people have pointed out that I don't really know how much I feel I need to read into this, but like, can't Toph tell if Katara's lying? Is that not a kind of continuity error? Again, maybe like Sokka, she's kind of feeling like, okay, like she thinks she's telling the truth, but like, this is just another one of those things of like, why are Aang and Sokka so like unable to believe her? It's just like, is Katara known for lying or something like that? It just feels weird that you're writing like these two characters who care about her to be like, that didn't happen, that you're forcibly having these characters like doubt her when no other scenes really present them as being like, you're not tough. Yes, in say like The Runaway, you address the idea that she's maybe not the most adventurous person, but in this case it just feels like not great. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this last section of the book?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think, the way it's a fun way to end the book. So like it works enough for what they're trying to go for as far as like making it seem like, oh, they can't believe her. And then, she's able to somehow, prove to them that this is actually the truth here. I mean, I don't know. I would think that the way that they're going or they're trying to go for it is more the story and the way that she's telling it no, it couldn't have happened that sort of way. Sort of like we're always talking about Boomy and his sort of like crazy stories that happen to him, that can't possibly be true, but then something crazy does happen at the end, and we can all see it, and we can tell that this is actually how it happened. So it could be along with one of those sort of lines here. I mean, the idea of Toph being able to tell the truth and whatnot. I mean, I don't know if that's something that they would really is that like enough? Is this like the situation where she's necessarily like trying to dig into this story? Like, is it so important that she has to sort of like tell the truth of the story, or if it's just like Katara believes that it's true, so that that's just sort of like flipping the switch on her lie detection skills or anything like that. I don't think that doesn't seem like that was too heavily sort of considered in this sort of situation here. I mean, it is too bad that she doesn't get like a line in here about being like, okay, that is kind of cool, or like sort of like the default sort of like Toph sort of like flippant remark of like, admitting that you are right without really admitting that you're right. Like that's something that I would have expected to come in this situation rather than just like sort of like a smirk and a smile at the last panel there, which you might not even notice unless you were really sort of paying attention to it, because the line there goes to Sokka. So I don't know. I think that definitely, if the whole point of this was to prove it to Toph that she is indeed Toph, then I think they kind of missed it a little bit from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. And then I didn't even really consider this line too much, but Jiang saying, we'll see about that. It might be time for me to retire. I'm getting too old for this. Like, how old is Jiang meant to be? Like, I realized I didn't really think about this much during the book, but like, she specifically says, I'm getting too old for these adventures. Kind of like, I placed her as potentially like a couple years older than Katara, not like 20 years older or whatever they're implying here. So I don't know if that's just like her kind of joking around again, being like, oh yeah, I'm only like 2 years older than you, but I'm ready to retire, or they're actually saying the character is quite a bit older. What's your interpretation of that? I suppose over the course of the whole book, like, where did you place Jiang with regards to age?
I don't know. I mean, I definitely placed her a lot older than any of our crew here. Like, she definitely at least like 20s, 30s, or whatever, something in that range. Now, is that actually retiring age? I don't know. I mean, we see people in the Avatar world, go for quite a long while with full bending abilities and sort of, seemingly almost like ageless in the way that they're actually able to move. So I don't know, what the relative, sort of like age would be for retiring. I mean, she does have quite a bit of scars on her face, so we can see that she has been through some battles for sure. I don't know if that's quite enough for me to age her up quite that far, though.
Yeah, because like Zuko has a scar and stuff like that. So yeah, yeah, it's just kind of weird. Yeah, I don't think she's like super old or anything like that, but like I don't know, maybe I just completely misread it, but that I placed her kind of being much younger. I think it doesn't help that like the rest of her crew seems like really young, like especially
Yeah, that's the
the
key.
guy with the sort of like messy hair. He seems like he's like 12, like just like Aang or whatever. Um, but yeah, that's the end of this one shot. So yeah, the problem ultimately is like coming out of it is that okay, 72 pages. We've had quite a good amount of content happen in previous comics that are 72 pages, even just in individual parts. I ultimately would say I don't think this book really used its page count as well as it could have, because there were quite a few ideas that it sort of touched on or kind of brought up for a second that it could have gone more into, and I think it just suffered because they didn't go into it. And I don't know. I just think it should be more the responsibility of comics like this to like I think take one of those topics and actually properly expand on it. But they clearly took it as no, it doesn't matter. The story doesn't need to be important. We'll just breeze through a bunch of little things and have no real payoff at the end. And especially going through it in such detail like we did, and seeing stuff like the really clear setup in the early pages for. It's about ultimately Katara proving herself to Toph. Even her saying "be tough like Toph" a few times during the book, and then never coming back around to that, I feel is just sort of kind of almost like an unforgivable kind of thing of just like, how did you not spot that this was an issue with the book? And it's the same with the other side plot of just ending it with just, okay, Aang tried to talk to the guy, Sokka tried to talk to the guy, and they just leave after that point, saying, let's stop bashing our head against this rock. There's no takeaway. Like, the characters don't move away and then speak to each other about it and say, this is what we learned from here, and like, we'll never talk to soldiers again, and it's just like, it happened, let's move on. There's no, what do we learn from talking to this guy, and this will affect how we handle things going forward. Like, we now know to never really try to talk to other Fire Nation soldiers, because we're not going to be able to convince them. I feel he could have at least maybe done something like that, of like them relaying what they got up to Katara, and then her maybe making the connection of just like, oh, that guy, you were talking to him, like, makes sense, and make a little bit of a joke maybe at the end about it. I just feel like they could have done a little bit more, or even like if they had done like full on one shot, like say we just removed the Aang and the soldier plot and gave all of those pages to delving into more stuff on the Katara side of things. I think it would have been nice to explore more of that Fire Nation Earth Kingdom dynamic, that the pirates are also not particularly happy with the Earth Kingdom army. Maybe it would have given more time for more specific backstory with Jiang, and I think that would have worked a little bit better. But what are your final thoughts on Katara and the Pirate Silver?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun one shot that ultimately doesn't really have any sort of bearing on our sort of perceptions of the character. So from that perspective, it's sort of like what's kind of the point of this sort of story? Is it just to sort of highlight something that we knew about Katara, or just to show just a random story, which essentially is what it is in the end? So I don't know. I mean, I think it's fun. It's not bad, it's not the worst, but it's definitely not on any of my top lists of the comics that we've had so far.
Yeah, that's my thing as well. It's just like, this just feels like 72 pages of comic featuring the characters, and that there's no real takeaway. And I feel like in 2020, the year that we've had for Avatar, where the comics have been before, the potential that the universe still has, this feels like it just had like next to no ambition to really do anything. And if this is going to be sort of representative of one shots like Avatar comics going forward for the next who knows however long, we could be a while before we get anything particularly of note. Thankfully, the next one shot does look to immediately like improve on things, in that Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy, it's going to be set in or around, I think it's just after the Rift. So we're in a more interesting time period. We've got the characters when they're a little bit older, and we're actually expanding the comic timeline, which actually could be quite interesting. Toph focused. We're going to have her and her metal bending students, so they're kind of fun. We're going to have Sokka and Suki also involved in this. I guess they'll be the side plot, the kind of Aang and the soldier equivalent for this book. And like we've discussed in the past, we've sort of figured out a lot of the sort of extra dynamics that are going on in this book, in that we're going to have Chong and the Nomads come in. We're also going to have the Earth Rumble come into play as well. So I don't think we have direct confirmation that means we're going to directly see the likes of the Boulder, the Hippo, and so on, but it probably does. I think that straight away kind of fixes a lot of the problems of like, okay, you're using a lot of your minor characters, memorable minor characters. You're going to develop specific comic characters with the metal bending students, and it looks like they're potentially going to have at least some sort of a plot with Toph, of her getting a bit feeling things are dull, just having a successful metal bending academy, what will get her feeling that things can improve. That feels like they're straight away of like they will by default accomplish more than this first book did. Um, so yeah, I guess what are your thoughts now that you've read the first one shot? How are you feeling going into this second one, given that it's set in like a different time period and so on?
I mean, I think they did a good choice by setting it in a different period and setting it in between something that's already, in the future, past the show. I think, you know, I don't know. I think retreading, stuff that we've already sort of done or filling in the gaps, at least in this case of the Katara story, doesn't quite seem like it's worth it. I mean, it's definitely a fun story, and it's not the worst thing ever, but it's not. I don't know. It doesn't feel, like it needed. Like if the story wasn't told, I don't think anyone would have particularly been sort of like, wanting to know, how Katara would do on her own in any sort of situation. We kind of have examples of that already. So the route that they're going for with the next book, I think, that adds more to the universe, even if it is still in between stuff that we already know. It's content that we haven't, that hasn't really been explored that much and only in one sort of medium. The fact that, the original story has, the original series, it has, the comics, there's multiple ways that that's already been told. This one, there isn't as much. So it feels like it's worth a lot more.
Yeah, and I think if the third one feels more like the Toph book than the Katara one, I think that's definitely the direction they should go in. I think they probably should stay away from setting stuff during ATLA unless they choose the right character. And I think what I mean by that is that for the most part, I don't really think we need to tell a lot of stories set during ATLA with Katara, Sokka, Toph, Zuko. But some of the other characters, the more sort of secondary characters, you might actually want to do that because all the speculation has been, now that we know for sure, the third one shot, we're getting a third one shot, it's going to be a female character who's the focus. Everyone pretty much is like, it kind of has to be Suki, doesn't it? Because if it's right now they're committing to it seems to be like all Team Avatar members, and the only other sort of female character you think who's like big enough to be on the cover would be Azula, but it feels like Azula is kind of off limits at the moment because they haven't done that story in the last 4 years. So why would they suddenly do it now? So it kind of has to be either Suki, Mei, or Ty Lee, I guess. Like, I don't know, is there even any other notable female character who it could be, really, unless you... I guess Ursa is a possibility if you place it in the right point. But yeah. What would be your speculation now that we know more specifically female character is going to be for the third one? Which character do you think it should be?
Yeah, I mean, and I think we already sort of like, even before we knew that this was sort of like the focus of, these books, we assumed or, considered very heavily that Suki would be, the character that they would sort of want to feature. And I don't know, I think if they did go that route, that could actually be a way to link that with the Toph one shot, even if it is still like a standalone story, it could still, have that sort of interconnectivity between them. I mean, if they did go with sort of like my entire Lee, I think, that could be interesting as well. But then it's like, you might feel that there are other characters that you might have to include in that story, which you might not necessarily want to actually touch at this time. So that seems like that's a least likely option to happen. Not that I would be opposed to that actually happening, though.
Yeah, and then, like I said, I think outside of maybe those three, it almost feels like you're maybe going too left field, maybe, like that the trio of characters that these books are going to be focused on maybe don't work as well together if you do decide to do, like, say, let's tell a Avatar Kyoshi story as like just a random one shot out of nowhere. I think people would like that, but it would kind of be
Hmm.
weird when I suppose they eventually collect this into a library edition and it's just Katara, Toph, and Kyoshi on the cover. It just would be a little random. Um, and then beyond that, the the rest of the characters that you are looking at like much more than the minor character side of things. So I think it feels like we can more or less figure out that it probably Suki seems to fit the best, um, and they've sort of done stuff before, like they've let her be the focus of a free comic book day book. So if they did do say a cover and it was like Suki on the front, and then maybe you have Sokka as like the support character for that book, that's going to sell because people like the potential for the relationship dynamic and so on, depending on where you set it. And then the other thing with Suki is that Suki is actually a character where you'd actually be okay with them setting the story in the middle of Avatar: The Last Airbender, because she's a character who has so many gaps in her appearances, in that she appears first in 104. She doesn't appear again until 212. So you have like nearly a season and a half before between appearances, where we know the sort of start and end of her journey, but we don't know how she gets there, and that's a perfect fill-in kind of opportunity. Same goes for there's a little bit of a gap between Serpent's Pass then and her appearance in Appa's Lost Days. You can tell a story there about what she's doing, and similarly, you could tell the story of like what she was up to in the Boiling Rock before Sokka arrives. You actually have lots of ground with Suki to cover, whereas you don't really have that with the other main characters. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? If they did a Suki story but actually set it during Avatar?
I don't know. I mean, you know, there is a lot of her character that hasn't been explored, from the past that, potentially could work. So that, in that case, even though we're saying like, right now that, sticking with our main characters back in the ATLA probably wouldn't be the best one because we were already so much around them with a character like Suki, depending on where you actually place her story potentially that could actually be interesting, especially since we know that there are a bunch of other characters around her and her team specifically that could have the potential for being explored that we don't really know anything at all about. So that, if that was the route that they were to go with, that seems like that would be like potentially a middle ground from, something from the older, show that, we haven't really explored, but it's new enough that we wouldn't really have, any sort of concrete information on. I mean, I still always would prefer them to sort of like push it forward, in some sort of way. But, I guess if they had to go that sort of route, that would seem like that could potentially be, a way to sort of compromise with sort of getting a story that's older but still somewhat newer. I mean, it still can't affect things later on, so there's still like loopholes and plot holes that you have to make sure you don't sort of cross, but there's more there probably to play around with than sort of what we have in this story here where we can figure out where things don't quite match up with the original sort of series and what we currently know at least.
Yeah, and the thing with Suki as well is that like you do have that interesting dynamic where we primarily know her interactions more or less almost exclusively like Suki and Sokka. So if you did a one shot where you like paired her up with pretty much any other member of the group and focused on the dynamic there, that's like just as interesting because in the grand scheme of the comics, like she hasn't really interacted that much with like Katara like individually or Aang individually. A
Mm-hmm.
little bit with Toph we've seen, but not as much. So you'd say like she's probably most developed with Sokka, Zuko, and maybe a little bit with Toph. So Katara or Aang team up with Suki would actually be kind of interesting. Or if you did set it during ATLA, just getting to see her as like the leader of a group of Kyoshi warriors, her as the full-on spotlight character, no fear of her being sort of diminished being around the rest of the team at all. That seems just as good, especially if you could potentially go into her backstory that we don't really know too much about in regards to, like, parents. Like, we don't really know much about that stuff, and so on. There's a lot of options that you actually have there. But yeah, Suki seems like the obvious choice. But yeah, it probably could be Mei or Ty Lee. And then I guess we're probably in line to get more one-shots after that. Now that they're sort of planned one-shots, I doubt they'll immediately stop them just after one trilogy. But that's where it's going to be interesting what happens with Mike and Brian's involvement going forward now. But yeah, I think that's most of what we need to talk about on this podcast. Like I said, we're still waiting for comic announcements, which will hopefully happen before the end of the year. And then we've got a lot of action figure news to look forward to as we enter 2021. But yeah, for the most part, that's been Avatar Online Podcast episode 221. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.